Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the second Parlance webinar of 2015. Today we're going to be examining Eliminating the Call Center, a higher education case study with one of our customers, Texas A&M University. Let's go ahead and jump in here. Joining us today is Mark Hero. Mark is the IT manager for telecommunications at Texas A&M. Mark comes with a background from Motorola and Sprint, where he worked his way up from a technician position into management and supervisory roles before joining Texas A&M about 15 years ago. My name is Mark Bedard, Director of Marketing here at Parlance. Take a look at today's agenda. Today we're just going to examine, well, we'll first start by looking at Texas A&M's call handling infrastructure prior to the relationship with Parlance. Then we're going to look at the call handling challenge the school faced and how they chose to solve that challenge, how they chose a solution, how that solution was implemented, the performance and service impressions they've received from the service they implemented, the results, and then we'll spend some time on questions and answers. You can ask a question at any time using the question toolbox in the GoToWebinar interface panel. You can ask those at any time, and we'll circle back around to those at the end of the presentation. Just some quick introductions for those of you unfamiliar with our organization. Parlance Corporation was founded in 1996. We focus solely on auto attendance solutions for large enterprise phone systems that really highlight a positive caller experience. We're mostly involved in the healthcare industry, higher education, and large enterprises. In case you're not familiar with our Operator Assistant solution, Operator Assistant was designed from the ground up specifically to support a positive caller experience. So really interacting with the caller in much the same manner a live operator would. The service is provided at a flat monthly service cost. It's also wrapped with a comprehensive service and support offer, which is geared towards eliminating the need for your internal IT resources or other employees to provide ongoing management, monitoring, and service of the solution. A little bit about Texas A&M University, celebrating 140 years, the fourth largest university in the United States. Faculty and staff of over 2,700 and over 5,200 students. So Mark Hero, thank you for joining us today, taking some time out. I'm sure you're busy with that many students, faculty, and staff, so we certainly appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Can you hear me okay, Mark?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for having me, and hello, everybody. Again, my name is Mark Hero. I'm with Texas A&M University, and I am very happy to be here today to discuss our call handling challenge we had that was pretty much solved with moving to Parlance.
Great, Mark. Let's start by looking at maybe what your call handling infrastructure looked like prior to working with Parlance.
Sure.
You could tell us a little bit about the tools and processes that you have in place.
Actually, the previous history of telecommunications in the university environment here was less than bleeding edge. We were a Centrex shop for many years. We are starting we have started a multi-year migration to voice over IP with a carrier-grade voice over IP solution, but we still have a fair chunk of Centrex still on campus. And with 30-some-odd thousand phones, there's a ton of stuff going on. For operator services, we had been using T-Metrix consoles with a an operator center located in our physical plant infrastructure. Telecommunications used to be part of physical plant. We got split off from physical plant over to University IT several years ago, but the operator center was still over at the physical plant, and we handled it jointly with physical plant department. So they did things like not only answering phone calls most of the time, but also did things like information dissemination and radio dispatching and things like that. But the lion's share was answering phones. The only thing is our call volume had been dropping even though we had a fairly large directory of names. Our call volume had been dropping over the number of years to the point of we're only getting about 100 calls a day, and it was still dropping. We assume this is basically because of web-enabled directories that people could look at on the internet and simply didn't care to call in into the operator center. But meanwhile, we had 6 operators that we had to fund and staff and deal with on a 24/7 basis. So we, even though we had split off from the physical plant and they took care of some of that budget, the university as a whole still had to pay for 6 telephone operators, and telecommunications had to pay for a fairly significant portion of that too. So, and as you might imagine, 6 operators for 100 calls a day is not really good for budgetary considerations or cost measures, but this is what we had.
And looking at the total annual cost for 6 operators, 6 FTEs fully loaded, I think the challenge you are facing is beginning to become clear here. 100 calls a day for that sort of cost seems
right.
Slightly unjustified.
Right.
Mark, maybe you could tell us a little about the other challenges you had mentioned.
Exactly. Part of the challenge related to this was the university's administration philosophy at that time, which was simply they wanted a human to answer the phones. They did not want an automated solution. They were several specific high-level administrators were dead set against it, and even though we had told them about our budgetary and staffing challenges and that the technology had improved significantly since they had probably looked at it at first, there was a lot of resistance because of the philosophy of the upper administration. That changed a couple of years ago, with 2 things happening at once. The first, there was a change in administration where the new administrators were more receptive to other alternatives, particularly with budgetary considerations becoming more of a forefront here than they had been. And to kind of throw a monkey wrench into the whole thing, the physical plant where these people worked was outsourced, or was to be outsourced, I guess I should say, and the outsourcing company wanted nothing to do with operator services. They say, we're physical plant outsourcers, so we deal with custodians and landscapers and things like that. We don't want to have anything to do with telephone operators. So those 2 things combined led us down the road of looking at this to both reduce our budget and reduce our staffing for that area and augment it with an automated solution. Now, we as the telecom office knew that voice-enabled directories and voice-enabled telecommunications in general had made some significant strides recently, so we were a lot more comfortable understanding that this could be a viable solution, and it turned out to be a matter of trying to convince some other people, and actually eventually the convincing turned out to be not as big as we had first worried about. So that's kind of where we came to this fork in the road to create a automated or semi-automated operator services function.
Now, Mark, now that you had the challenge in front of you and you decided on a direction, walk us through a little bit about the selection process for the criteria. So you issued an RFP, and what were your main criteria for the selection process?
Sure. Well, as you might suspect, with an organization of the university size, nothing happens without paperwork. And we had to create an extensive RFP for this new function. First on our list, the most heavily weighted issue was, of course, the feature set. We wanted to be sure that the caller experience was as natural and easy for the caller as possible, and not only have a directory type of function, but also have the flexibility to create other functions as well using the same type of technology. So for example, we may in the future have some information dissemination on special events, for example, that a caller could simply call in and request a specific topic and receive an automated response or a direction to a specific department or person. Beyond that, our next selection criteria was price. Obviously, we have to get the best value we can for the state and the university. And we tried to kind of split the difference in the RFP. We wanted something that an RFP respondent could have a system that they took care of completely on their own, or we could take certain small tasks from it, like, for example, recording names. The university has its own fairly sophisticated recording studio, for example. We've got a large IT organization, for example. So we wanted the ability, if we could, to save a little money by doing some things ourselves. The preference, though, if we could, was to have the RFP respondent do an all-inclusive type of service, but have an option for us to do some of it ourselves. The next criteria was the experience of the company. We were looking for somebody that had good experience in the niche and in the industry. The university has had some interesting experiences with brand new organizations trying to get in with extremely low bids on other projects and weren't able to perform, and we've taken that bitter experience to heart, and in the selection process we wanted to make sure that the people responding, the organizations responding, actually had some knowledge in the area. And then finally we wanted to look at referrals and references from other universities particularly, but other also large organizations that use these systems and could tell us how they manage it and what kind of problems they had, or if any, with the various systems out there. So those were the four main things, and as you might suspect, we had a committee. Nothing doesn't happen around here without a committee, and we finished all that up and got it out in a extremely compressed period, but we still think we had a fairly robust request out there.
And
go ahead.
No, Mark, go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say we did receive 4 responses from our RFP. One was discarded virtually immediately because it was non-responsive in several key areas, so we didn't even bother. Of the other three, one was minimally acceptable with some concerns on our side. The score was much lower than the other two. Of the two remaining ones, there was a solution by a vendor that was familiar with government entities, not so much familiar with university entities. And then basically at the top of the scoring list was Parlance, who had answered an extremely thorough reply to our RFP and had some significant benefits that they were able to show us in their response.
Great. And Mark, I'll just put those up on the screen here from the feedback you had provided as far as the Parlance offer aligning with your selection criteria. Okay. So, Mark, and I'll just walk everyone through the proposed solution that Parlance did include in our RFP response. We proposed Parlance Operator Assistant, both public and internal applications to serve caller communities within the school and as well as public callers. SIP connection into the existing infrastructure, which will then also support the migration path. An 8-port solution to provide plenty of bandwidth and to manage the more than enough for your call load, that's for sure. And interestingly enough, after compiling all of the data sources from the various resources available in the school, that 40,000 name directory we actually found was really only 20,000 names once it was all cleaned up, compiled and put back together in a usable format. And also inclusive with the proposed solution, as with every operator system solution, was Parlance's inclusive management and performance improvement services. So just moving on, Mark, as far as the implementation process, I know you had mentioned you had a tight schedule and a tight timeline due to the outsourcing of physical plant activities. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. We basically had a 3-month timeline from beginning to end for this, which for the university is warp speed. We were given initially a fairly hard deadline. They did soften that eventually to give us an extra month if we needed it. Luckily, we didn't need all of it. We were able to meet that deadline with some streamlined work to get a basic system out the door in that time frame. We did have some significant concern that, particularly my system administrator, that we were going to have a huge amount of work to do with no time to do it. And frankly, Parlance kind of put our minds at ease with that, because they were very instrumental in looking at our database and saying, okay, here's what we need from you, the university, and sort of the environmental issues like rack space and things like that. And we ended up being much more of a facilitator than actually feet on the ground running around like crazy. We provided them with an initial database. We got them rack and power space in our network center. And we actually facilitated them talking with our HR people, our budgetary people who maintained the original, the authoritative database for employees, staff, and to some extent students as well. And So Parlance did what amounts to the heavy lifting of this whole thing, with some providing us some feedback at appropriate times, and we could give them some direction on what we preferred to do. And they were quite easy to work with, and in fact, our time that we ended up using ourselves was actually very small. We ended up, the amount of man-hours on our end ended up being only about 20 hours for everybody, which was very, very surprising to us, and my system administrator was tickled to death. He said, if I'd known this was going to be all that I needed to do, I wouldn't have been nearly so worried. He was just happy as a clam.
That's great.
And since then, that policy, that procedure, it has moved with Parlance as well. So working with Parlance has been extremely easy. They've done a lot of the hard work, the heavy lifting. They have gotten with us on a number of occasions proactively and said, hey, we've noticed this. What do you want to do? And we provided the feedback. And without any significant issue on our part, they've just taken and run with it, and to the point where we love Parlance at this point, have no desire to take on any part of the system on our own. The Parlance is a end-to-end solution for us, and basically no news is good news. We just find the solution just rocks and rolls.
That's great, Mark. Good to hear. Good to hear that directly from the customer, of course. Let's move right into the real meaty part here, Mark. When we look at some of the results of the solution integration, maybe you could just walk us through a little bit of your staffing changes and the associated savings as a result of this change, and kind of this whole shift of philosophy of perhaps we don't need the call center anymore. And maybe you could also walk us through what now happens when people call into the university.
Sure. What our basic system does is, rather than going through a call center now, we use the Parlance solution with any overflow or operator requests going to the university-wide IT help desk, which is staffed 24 hours a day with a number of different departments contributing to it. But in effect, we pay for one FTE in that department.
And Mark, so just circling back, you had 6 originally.
We had, correct. We had up to 6 operators. Now we have 1 FTE. We pay for an FTE with then Parlance as well, and that has, as you can see on the screen, pretty significantly lowered our costs. And in fact, our ROI was met within a year. It's been dramatic, to say the least.
And also, Mark, you mentioned an interesting dynamic I just thought we should jump into, is the changing call load numbers. So could you just tell us a little bit about what you've seen on your end?
Oh, yeah. As I mentioned earlier, our call volumes had been dropping steadily over the years, and again, we were down to maybe 100 calls a day. Within the past few months, they started going up again by a fairly significant bit, and we're at a bit of a quandary on why it is. We've done some looking around. We think part of the reason is that callers are generally now used to automated voice-enabled solutions. They're more comfortable with it. Maybe some people just don't care to interact with a live person for what they're asking about. And we've also discovered that staff and faculty here on campus who only have a single line desk phone, a plain vanilla 2600 set, for example, are using the operator system as a speed dial rather than picking up their phone and looking up somebody on their own paper directory or notes or email or whatever. They're just simply picking up the phone, calling the directory, and saying, I want to speak to John Smith.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously calls are going right through. So our call volume is going up, but luckily we've been able to keep the call volumes to the overflow help desk at a lower level. It hasn't risen the same amount because we've asked Parlance to tighten up on their confidence level of the system. And I'm hoping, Mark, you might be able to describe the confidence level, how that works, because we initially intentionally asked Parlance to keep the confidence level fairly low while we got used to the new system.
Sure.
And then as people have become more and more comfortable with it, we've asked Parlance to tighten up the confidence level.
Yeah, so confidence scoring is a protocol used by Operator Assistant in order to rank from the caller's utterance exactly how confident the system is in connecting that person to a destination in the enterprise. So a millisecond after recognizing what the caller said, Bob Smith, Operator Assistant will quickly run through, I'm 90% confident that they said that he said Bob Smith. So with a 90% confidence score, I'm going to transfer this call to the Bob Smith destination I have in the directory. However, with a lower confidence score, it might say, I'm only 30% confident that this person said Bob Smith. Perhaps I should play them an additional message just to clarify. Are you looking to reach Bob Smith? Yes. Okay, now I'm 100% confident that they've said Bob Smith. Now I'm going to connect it. So it's one of the tuning functions Parlance uses in order to, when we're monitoring performance, those thresholds can be tweaked slightly either way and can impact the overall performance of the solution and how successful it is from offloading calls. So, Mark, thanks for exploring that for us. And I just wanted to quickly let you wrap up from the results section of what you're doing as far as call center operations now. Basically, you've ceased call center operations.
Essentially, that is it. We have closed our operator call center. Parlance handles the lion's share of directory requests. When a caller specifically requests an operator, or the system is unsure for some reason, it does overflow over to a help desk. The help desk does know that a call is coming in from the directory system, so they can be prepared for the call. We've reduced our staffing from 6 FTEs to the equivalent of 1 FTE. We've had no significant, actually no, I shouldn't even say significant, we have no depreciation in service levels. Service levels were never a huge concern for us in the first place, but it's nice to know that nothing's happened with it. Things have gone very, very nicely in that respect. And in fact, we have gotten extremely few complaints. In fact, since we started over a year ago, I can count the number of callers concerned about it on one hand. Virtually no concern at all from the users, from the university community in general. Everybody has been very comfortable with the system. We've been very comfortable with the system, and it's been one of those things where we have said it and forgot it, essentially. No news is good news. The system just bakes on its own, and we just move on with doing our other jobs.
That's great. Mark, so if you had one final customer impression to say about the implementation of Parlance Operator Assistant, what would you have to say?
As far as implementation, it was extremely easy, far easier than what we were expecting. Parlance handled virtually all of the work on their own, coming to us when they needed to, and they delivered what we asked when we asked for it, and we've been extremely happy with the system as a whole.
That's great. Well, Mark, thank you for the overview and walking us through what you've done with your operator services. I'm going to open this up now to the question and answer session. Again, feel free to type any questions, our attendees here, into the question window in the GoToWebinar user interface. We've got a couple here to get us started. What destinations were in the 20,000 that were eliminated from the directory? So, Mark, we had started out the presentation noting that the original directory sources you had shipped over had 40,000 entries, and yet the directory we're using for the operator system is limited to about 20,000. Maybe you could walk us through the directory cleanup and what you feel was where did those 20,000 go?
They disappeared. Yeah, there were actually a number of different circumstances going on with that. Some of our database, if you will, was manual. It was paper binders. There was quite a bit of duplication we discovered. There was also quite a bit of information that was over the years. You have to remember this system was accumulating over many, many years. A lot of information was for destinations far out of the university system. For example, we had numbers for county extension agriculture agents. We had numbers for, across the state. We had numbers for departments that had nothing to do with the university in an entire another city. We had destinations that no longer existed. In fact, we had quite a few destinations that no longer existed. So we decided while we were doing this migration that we were going to concentrate on numbers that were a local phone call. That if the phone system could transfer it to a office, even if it was out of the university campus but still local, the system would do that. If the number was out of the county, out of the local calling zone, it would either get removed or we would send it to the help desk for continued directory lookup. We simply didn't want to send a caller to Houston or Dallas or New York or Pakistan, for example.
Understandably,
so
yeah.
A lot of it was deciding what we wanted to transfer to internally, and a lot of it was duplication and incorrect destinations that were no longer used that had been accumulated over many, many years.
Sure. So a combination of unnecessary, perhaps, destinations as well as error-ridden entries, and that's not an uncommon thing typically when Parlance does work with a customer to create that directory that's to be consumed by the application. Mark, moving on here, what happens if the one operator is busy?
That is, I guess I shouldn't say one operator. It's one FTE. So, sort of like what we had at the physical plant, the help desk is actually staffed by many people doing a number of different tasks, helping computer users with software. They're helping people doing things with voicemail, for example. They're doing network kinds of troubleshooting and customer interfaces. So that place has been staffed. There could be 10 or 20 people in it. I have no idea what they're doing right now.
Okay, so
we only pay for one equivalent person.
Gotcha. Okay, but there's multiple bodies available to take those overflow
Correct.
calls in the event.
Correct. And so any one of them can answer the phone and see it is coming from the directory system and answer it appropriately.
Understood. Another question coming in here. Can you customize the application for different callers, i.e. different greetings?
Yes, and in fact we do. I don't, frankly, know the ins and outs of that. Maybe Mark can be a little more specific on that. But we do have it set where if a particular call originator type comes in, it's routed in a different fashion than another type. Maybe Mark, you can speak to that
absolutely.
a little more generally.
And that all actually begins well before implementation, when Parlance is working on evaluating your operator services. Parlance's process for working with a new customer is to first really get to know their callers. Who are the caller communities that are calling into your organization, and what are the actions that they're trying to take? And typically we begin that process by doing an in-depth operator survey, by sitting with your operators and understanding all these different caller groups, caller communities. And then we can begin to get an understanding of what sort of greetings or dialogues would one specific caller community require versus another. Does this caller community perhaps require a longer greeting with maybe a different option, or do they just require that very brief, good morning, who would you like to reach? Or is it an internal caller, in which case they don't even need that. They could just say name please, and the internal user is accustomed to using that, so that actually decreases the connection time. And then when the callers are actually calling in, depending on the dialed number or even the caller ID, operator assistant can select the appropriate dialogue and greeting to serve up to that caller, and right from the greeting down to the different dialogue options. For instance, if someone was calling in for, athletics, it could then drill down further into that dialogue tree and say, are you trying to reach undergraduate or graduate athletics, or are you trying to reach, what sport are you trying to inquire about, et cetera, et cetera. So not only will the greetings be customized depending on that caller, but any associated dialogues which we would add in to help guide them to the right section if they're having trouble with the system.
And in fact, on our system, we do have a slightly longer greeting on external calls. Basically, welcome to Texas A&M University. Howdy. How may I help your call? How may I direct your call?
You got to get that howdy in there. That's state law, isn't that right, Mark?
Yeah, it's state law. Yeah, I'm afraid so. And then internally, it essentially says, "Who would you like to speak to?"
Gotcha. And that's typically something that we do recommend. It increases the internal usage. And another question coming in, Mark. Who made the final decision to move forward with the auto attendant? So I guess who was the final decision maker?
It was the as I said earlier, nobody does anything around here without a committee. It was the RFP committee, which was about a half a dozen people from mostly telecommunications, but there were some others involved as well, making a final determination. And then that in turn was handed off to the university's contracts and compliance group for a contract creation agreement kind of thing. But essentially, we made the final decision.
Okay. And I think that's about it for questions today. Mark, let me just wrap up and say thank you so much for joining us today. Really great story to tell, Texas A&M. We're very happy to continue our working relationship, and I appreciate your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, and I hope everyone got some good information out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And for our users today, our attendees today, anybody wants to learn some more, please join us at www.parlancecorp.com, and hope to talk to you soon. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining the webinar.